Historic meeting. Pope Francis will visit with the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Gloves are off.
If you've got something to say, say it.
Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders trade accusations. Financial reform, what the Holy See is doing to better manage its money. The dark side of the Super Bowl, a push to avoid prostitution. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, February 5th, 2016. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Vatican makes an historic announcement for the first time since the Russian Orthodox Church split from Rome. The two leaders will meet face to face. Pope Francis plans to hold a 2-hour meeting with Russian Patriarch Kirill. They will meet next Friday in Cuba on the Pope's way to Mexico. The two churches split during the Great Schism of 1054 and have remained estranged. They differ in recognizing the primacy of the papacy. And the Russian Orthodox Church says the Catholic Church is poaching converts in former Soviet lands. We're also learning more about the Pope's trip to Mexico. He plans to celebrate Mass on the U.S.-Mexico border in Juarez so that people on both sides of the fence can participate. Our producer, Mary Shovlain, joins us now from Rome. Mary, what can you tell us about this historic meeting?
This is a meeting that has been 1,000 years in the making since the two churches split in the Schism of 1054. Since then, a pope and a Russian patriarch have not met, so that's been 1,000 years. It was announced to our surprise this morning by an impromptu press conference with Father Lombardi, and it's significant because they haven't met in 1,000 years, despite the Vatican's many attempts. But what has brought them together is their mutual concern for the persecution of Christians in Africa and the Middle East, and this common concern has brought about this meeting.
Why Cuba?
The Holy Father, as we know, is leaving for Mexico next Friday on the 12th. It just so happened that Patriarch Kirill happened to be going on his own trip to Latin America and would be in Cuba. So I think through backdoor negotiations, they said, hey, what about if we meet in Cuba as our neutral location? We always knew it would be a neutral location, not in Rome, not in Moscow, but we always assumed it would be in Europe. But Cuba, as Father Lombardi said, turned out to be the perfect place.
Tell me what you've learned so far about the Pope's trip to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Well, this is exactly why he's leaving Rome next Friday. After a stop to Cuba, he'll make his way to Mexico, where he'll be for about 6 days. What came out in the details of a press conference today with Father Lombardi is that the Holy Father is going to both borders, the southern and the northern border of Mexico, because Mexico is also plagued by its own immigration crisis. People from Central America immigrating through Mexico to try and to get into the U.S. And he will celebrate a Mass on that northern border in Juarez. About 200,000 people are expected. But what's interesting is that it will only be about 80 meters from the U.S. border. And so, in a sense, this Mass will go over the border. It will be a cross-border Mass, and the Holy Father will go up to the fence afterwards to greet all the people on the United States sides of the border. So a truly strong message and a historical event.
Mary Shovlain, our producer in Rome. Mary, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Matthew Bunson is a historian, theologian, and faculty member at Catholic Distance University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Let's go back to the Pope and the Russian Orthodox Patriarch. Why is it so important that they're meeting?
Well, it's important because Pope Francis has, and indeed no pope has ever met with the Patriarch of Moscow. Now, this is an institution that goes back to 1598 when it was first established, but we're also talking about the faith in Russia dating back to the 9th century. So that itself is significant. We have one of those occasions where we're saying something like this has never happened before.
It's really never happened before. Well, tell me why the significance, though. What do you think Pope Francis is trying to do?
Right. Well, Pope Francis is the inheritor of great progress in ecumenical dialogue. We have seen that with the modern popes, from Paul to John Paul II to Benedict XVI. What Francis now is doing is trying to establish a dialogue, open dialogue with the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, which represents 200 million Orthodox. It's the largest Orthodox community in the world, and Patriarch Kirill, as head of that community, is by far the most prominent of all the patriarchs in the world.
So is the goal to bring the fold together? Is that what it is doing? And could that ever happen? Because the differences between them, they don't believe in the infallibility of the Pope.
Right.
And they don't believe in many things that we don't believe in.
Well, there are clear obstacles that remain. You've touched on them, Mary touched on some of them. What Francis is trying to do, though, is to establish a dialogue at the very top that gives encouragement to all of the dialogue that takes place below. And we're seeing as well the fact that in June in Crete, you have a pan-Orthodox meeting of all the patriarchs. This is going to be a major topic of conversation. Francis also wants to make sure that he has an opportunity to have a solid voice together of Christians in dealing with the crisis, the genocide, as it's now being called, of Christians in the Holy Land and in the Middle East.
We're going to be talking about that a little bit later, and I pressed the White House on why we are not talking about genocide. Very quickly before we go, what do you expect to come out of this meeting?
Well, I think first, an impetus to dialogue. I think we're going to see Francis in Moscow at some point. It's highly likely he will be going to Moscow at the invitation of Vladimir Putin, as well as pointing the way toward 2025. The anniversary of the Council of Nicaea.
There we go. Thank you very much, Dr. Matthew Bunson. Always a pleasure to have you.
Great to be with you.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. President Obama made a surprise appearance in the press briefing room to tout the latest jobs report. He said that after reaching a 10% unemployment rate in 2009, the rate has now fallen to 4.9%.
The argument I'm making here, and will continue to make during the course of this year, is we should be proud of the progress we've made.
When asked why he hasn't received credit he feels he deserves for the improved economy, the president explained that the recovery from the Great Recession is ongoing, and many have yet to recover from the losses that they experienced. The Democratic debate between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton quickly became heated, with candidates sparring over health care, Wall Street, and who is more progressive.
I'm not making promises that I cannot keep.
Hillary Clinton took a clear swipe at Bernie Sanders in a debate that was at times combative.
The Republicans want to repeal the Affordable Care Act. I want to improve it. I want to build on it, get the cost down, get prescription drug costs down. Senator Sanders wants us to start all over again.
I am on the Health Education Labor Committee. That committee wrote the Affordable Care Act. The idea that I would dismantle health care in America while we're waiting to pass a Medicare for all is just not accurate.
Clinton accused Sanders of smearing her progressive credentials.
I really don't think these kinds of attacks by insinuation are worthy of you. And enough is enough. If you've got something to say, say it.
I mean, instead of arguing about definitions, let's talk about what we should do.
But Sanders didn't back down.
I am very proud to be the only candidate up here who does not have a super PAC, who is not raising huge sums of money from Wall Street or special interests. In my view, the business model of Wall Street is fraud.
Clinton, touting her experience, also attempted to distance herself from Wall Street's big money.
I have a record, I have stood firm, and I will be the person who prevents them from ever wrecking the economy again.
Republican presidential candidates are also preparing to debate. They'll face off tomorrow night on ABC. The network did not invite Carly Fiorina, even though she outperformed John Kasich and Chris Christie in Iowa. On the campaign trail, Chris Christie attacks fellow Republican Marco Rubio over abortion. Christie says Rubio supports banning all abortions, including cases of rape, incest, or life of the mother. Rubio responded to Christie by turning the attack on Hillary Clinton.
She believes that there should be no such thing as an illegal abortion, that even on the due date, a child should be legal to abort a child. And she believes that partial birth abortion should be legal, which is a gruesome procedure.
Joining me now is John Gizzi, chief political correspondent for NewsMax, who also is with me every day in the press briefing room. We just heard from two Republican candidates for president, Chris Christie, Marco Rubio, fighting over abortion. Is this an issue? Are social issues what you're really seeing on the campaign trail?
Not necessarily. It all depends on the state. In Iowa, for example, where there is a strong Catholic contingent among caucus goers, as well as 60% of self-identified caucus goers being evangelicals, I would say yes, and one's position on the right to life is important. In New Hampshire, less so. People generally mind their own business, and we'll tell you that when you go to the Granite
when you
State.
do go there.
So I would say that it all depends on what state you're in and who you're talking to.
Well, there's been a lot of controversy, and we can go back to something we just reported on, that Hillary Clinton, she was put on the spot this week about all of the money that she gets paid or was paid to do speeches for Wall Street groups. She hasn't given much of a response that has gotten traction. Do you think she's going to survive this bad press?
Yes, I do, in the sense that she will probably simply say that this is something that didn't influence her thinking, that she did this and then made donations to charity. In fact, I'm almost certain she would respond that way. The one thing I would say is that were I running for president after a career in public service, I would be very hesitant about joining boards of directors, as Governor Bush did, or accepting big fees for speeches.
Exactly, because I don't think that real people can understand that you are just going to talk for $225,000 and that relationship isn't somehow going to influence you down the road. President Obama's visit to a Baltimore mosque has provoked some backlash, and even from Muslim pundits. And I spoke to a prominent Muslim who criticized his choice of mosque. Let's take a listen.
This is not a moderate mosque, and I think as a Muslim, I find it offensive that he chooses a mosque that doesn't share his values from a universal humanitarian perspective and almost has a bigotry of low expectations when it comes to Muslims and uses us as backdrops rather than as examples of the liberal principles that he claims to believe in.
Now, do you believe that this criticism is warranted?
Well, obviously, when the president speaks on such a sensitive area, one should be careful about the venue in which the commander-in-chief is cast. I would say if there were any semblance of controversy, the White House advance team should have done their homework a little bit better. Now, the president on the next day addressed the National Prayer Breakfast and gave a fine speech talking about the persecution of Christians, about the importance of people such as Pastor Abedini, one of the 5 released American prisoners, coming home and being able to operate freely as they do missionary work.
Well, thank you, John.
Different.
Yes, it was different. You're right. Thank you very much, John Gizzi from NewsMax. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Coming up, the Super Bowl's dark side, why it can lead to human trafficking, and Christian persecution, why the White House is reluctant to call it genocide. A deadly accident today in New York City. A crane collapsed in Lower Manhattan, smashing parked cars, killing 1 and injuring 3. The mayor says high winds toppled the crane as it was being lowered. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Each Super Bowl brings a wave of tourism to the host city. But what many may not know is it's a haven for human trafficking. Catherine Szeltner reports on the impact Sunday's big game may have on modern-day slavery.
It's the biggest football game of the year, but Super Bowl 50 has a side that's not as glamorous. Shared Hope International rescues children and women enslaved in the sex trade. The Christian group says Sunday's big game is a big venue for the industry.
There's an increase of demand, and when we see an increase of demand for commercial sex, we're likely to see more human trafficking.
To fight back on Super Bowl Sunday, Shared Hope released a campaign last year with a powerful message. Children aren't playthings. Eliza Rioch says the campaign shatters stereotypes about sex slavery victims.
Every time people hear about it, they're shocked to say, we thought this was somewhere else, we thought this was in another country.
Jody O'Hearn says human trafficking reaches U.S. neighborhoods, schools, and social media. So parents need to keep the red flags in mind.
You know, if you see that your kids are changing behavior, they're changing their friends, there's all of a sudden a much older boyfriend hanging around, then, parents should ask. They should look into it.
O'Hearn believes everyone should work to end this new form of modern slavery.
So each and every one of us, whether we're a parent, a grandparent, even just a citizen out on the streets, we each and every one of us have a responsibility to our children to protect them.
The day after the Super Bowl this Monday, the church celebrates St. Josephine Bakhita's feast day. She was a slave who became a religious sister. St. Josephine is considered the patron saint of human trafficking. Lauren.
Thank you, Catherine. The European Union declared the religious persecution of Christians in the Middle East genocide. One Catholic group says unless there is significant intervention by world powers, the Middle East Christian presence may disappear completely within a decade. In the White House press briefing room, I asked Press Secretary Josh Earnest why the U.S. hasn't designated Christian persecution as genocide. And it's a term coined after World War II and is used to describe intent to destroy entire groups.
The decision to apply this term to this situation is an important one. It has significant consequences, and it matters for a whole variety of reasons, both legal and moral. But it doesn't change our response. And the fact is that this administration has been aggressive, even though that term has not been applied, in trying to protect religious minorities who are victims or potential victims of violence.
Joining us now is Kirsten Evans. She's the Executive Director of In Defense of Christians, and Aram Hamparian, the Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of America. What is your reaction to the administration not using the word genocide?
Well, Lauren, I have to tell you we're both impatient and still hopeful, right? In the omnibus bill of last year for 2016, there's actually a provision in the part on religious freedom in which Congress has basically mandated by law that the State Department and the presidential administration make this designation within 90 days of the passing of that bill. That takes us out to March 17th, which is the middle of next month.
Why is this so important, Aram, to get this designation of genocide?
Very often an honest recognition of a wrong is a key to the remedy of that wrong. The denial of truth, the truthful designation of this genocide is in many ways an obstruction to the steps we need to stop it and also to secure justice for its victims. The cycle of genocide just gets perpetuated when we fail to confront it.
So what is the significance then of the EU resolution? Do you think that's going to do something to spur the United States to action?
Yeah, I mean, Lauren, that significance is huge. Or basically what the European Union has done is they've said, we're going to take the moral leadership on this issue. And they have basically taken the world stage to say, we're willing to recognize this as genocide. And they're asking the United Nations to begin an international criminal court investigation into these crimes in order to discuss how the international community can begin to bring about justice for these crimes. So.
Can you just tell me what impact this would have on Armenians if something like this were to happen, that the word genocide was to be applied?
Sure. I think that Armenians have struggled for more than a century with Turkey's obstruction of justice for the Armenian genocide. That's basically because America, as a government, as a state, has treated dealing with genocide as a political choice, not as a moral imperative. If we can elevate the world's response from a political commodity to a moral imperative, we think it'll have a great effect in terms of resolving the Armenian genocide, but more broadly, it'll put America on the right side of ending all genocides.
You said you're hopeful that this will happen. Do you expect it to happen? Do you expect President Obama to ever make that declaration?
You know, Laura, we have resolutions in Congress which have 187 representatives that is co-sponsored, stating that this is a genocide. We have another bill in the Senate that is taking up traction in the same area. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has submitted to the White House their study on this, saying this is genocide. It's hard to imagine that a president who himself wrote the Presidential Study Directive 10 in 2011, which Barack Obama was the person that said that crimes against humanity and genocide are a question of national security and they're a question of moral leadership. So.
You're, again, hopeful. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Up next, a pro-life advocate responds to an attack on her home. And money matters, the Vatican's push for everyone to be better stewards of God's gifts. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The founder of WikiLeaks says he feels vindicated. Julian Assange is accused of sexual assault in Sweden. He's been avoiding arrest since 2012 by staying at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. A United Nations human rights panel just sided with him, saying he should be allowed to walk free.
It is a victory of historical importance. not just to me, for my family.
Assange is still not expected to go free right away and will likely remain at the embassy. A recent attack on the home of a national pro-life advocate raises concerns. Jill Stanek is joining us from outside of Chicago. She is the national campaign chair for the Susan B. Anthony list. What happened and what was your reaction, Jill?
I came home from vacation on Sunday night to find that a cinder block had been thrown through my front window with a note attached to it to quit the pro-life BS, but using the actual term.
Why do you think this happened to you in particular? You're an active Christian in the pro-life movement?
Yeah, I have been active since I discovered as a nurse 15 years ago that the hospital where I worked was aborting babies alive, and I held an abortion survivor, and that instantly converted me into a pro-life activist. I've been a blogger and tweet and Facebook, but my life had taken a non-public turn the last 6 months when I took on the role at Susan B. Anthony list and I quit blogging. So I was actually a little surprised that this happened now.
But you do protest. You do protest, and this is very much a part of your life. Do you feel like this is a personal attack, and does it bother you?
I never take these sorts of attacks personally. I know that what I'm fighting for is to stop abortion, and so I always look at it from that view that nothing is ever personal.
And does it help the movement?
I think it points out that the side that's really violent is a pro-abortion side. You know, where the pro-life side is constantly accused of being violent. It's just not true. It's the most peaceful social justice movement in the history of social justice movements, and the real violent ones are the pro-abortion side, because their baseline, of course, is killing preborn babies. And so this is just more evidence of that.
Thank you, Jill. Jill Stanek joining us from outside of Chicago.
Thank you.
Professional and transparent. That's how an economist handpicked by Pope Francis describes the Holy Father's vision for Vatican reform.
We're the same person with the same values, whether we are doing business or whether we're with our family.
Joseph Zara laid out the Pope's goals at the Catholic University of America this week. EWTN's Wyatt Goolsby reports.
We've heard about Vatican reforms within the Vatican for several years now, but what exactly does that mean for Pope Francis? What is his vision of reform?
This is a Pope who has put as his priority, that Catholics need, and the whole world, will need to look at the issues which are related to poverty, to the people, to the marginalized, people who are living in the periphery. To achieve that mission of having even more funds which can go for the purpose, to assist and support the poor, you have to have an efficient system where there is no misallocation of resources.
What are some of the big challenges, whether it be financial or otherwise, that either have been addressed or need to be addressed?
One principle is, you need to strengthen internal controls. You have a system of checks and balances. But in the meantime, you have to mitigate against any risk, of having the possibilities of cases of abuse, cases of misuse of funds.
What do you think it is about Pope Francis that keeps him motivated towards this issue of reform, and what do you think that kind of drives him more than so many others to keep this going?
He gives great importance to leading by example. That is, the only way that you can inspire people is by living what you believe in. And, this living and also being seen and perceived by the outside world, that you're actually not only saying things, but you're actually living things in your, from day to day.
Joseph Zara, thank you so much for talking with us about it today.
Thank you very much.
For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Good night and God bless.